Glenn Wiebe is a social studies teacher, a frequent conference and workshop presenter, and a social studies consultant for SDAC in Kansas. His session, Thinking Historically, Strategies for Integrating Evidence, will give us some great ideas of how to use primary sources in the classroom. So, enough of me, let's get right into it with Glenn. Thank you and welcome.
Good morning. It is really good to be here. I'm gonna be clicking through some stuff, and again, Jane and Joan are gonna be highlighting some of the links that I'm going to be talking about. This truly, hopefully, will be a interactive sort of session as best that we can make it with the chat feature on the right side. I was able to listen to Keith's presentation. It looked like lots of people are joining in on the chat feature. That's going to be really necessary over the next 60 minutes or so, because I'm going to be asking you to look at a variety of things, just like Keith asked you to look at some evidence to solve problems. We're going to be doing the same sort of thing. Here in a few minutes, I'll share a specific link where all of these, I know Jane does a really good job of putting some links on there. I've tried to put them all in one place. So if there's a tab that you have open or another window that you'll have open, I'll give you a specific link where you can go and get all of these things with Jane's help, so that you can look at. There's going to be a video that I'm hoping that you can look at, some documents, some photographs as we get into this. So get ready for that. We're gonna expect this to be very interactive. So you can't be sleeping, even though we're all not together. I'll know. I just do. I just know. As Jane said, I work at SDAC. We're an educational service center in Hutchinson, Kansas. This is some of my contact information. Obviously, I try to connect with teachers as much as possible. I'll show all these links back again at the end of the session. But my task has been, in the last 15 years with SDAC, is to help social studies. One teacher said, "Glenn, your job is to help us not freak out." And I figured that's about as good a job description as I can come up with. Finding things that work, sharing them with teachers, modifying them to work at different grade levels so that teachers don't freak out, so that they can do their jobs as best that they possibly can. So in a lot of ways, it's the best possible job. I get to meet lots of teachers and work with them and get in their classrooms and see them do their business and steal their great ideas and share it with lots of other people. And so that's what I'm going to try to do today, is just share very quickly with you some of the tools that just some examples of tools and strategies that have worked for other teachers as they integrate primary sources into the classroom, with some specific focus on literacy. One of the things that, at least in Kansas and a lot of the places I get the chance to travel around and visit, there really is a focus, obviously, of integrating social studies content with ELA literacy skills. And so that's really part of our focus today as well. So I want to start with this particular quote. Most of you are probably familiar with James Loewen. And if you're not, these are a couple of books that you really need to find the time to read. I know right now with the holidays coming up, it's an incredibly busy time, but next summer, make some time to read some of James Loewen's books. One of his first books was called Lies My Teacher Told Me: Everything Your American History Textbook Got Wrong. The one that's on the screen is his latest one, and I really love the subtitle. Getting students excited about doing history. I had the opportunity several years ago to drive him around. He was doing some sessions and he needed a chauffeur, so I volunteered just to pick his brain and have a chance to talk with him as we drove around. And this is one of the phrases that have stuck with me ever since that time we spent together. And he very simply said, kids don't hate history. They hate the way we teach it. And I think he's right. The very first sentence in his book, his first book, talked about how kids hate history, and he cited some research that documented student responses to a very simple question: what is your least favorite class? And these are high school students, and the least favorite class was U.S. history. And it always just stuns me. Are you kidding me? U.S. history is awesome. I mean, we all know all the great stories and all the things that happened, and the people and the places and the events and the coincidences and the details. They hate it more than math, which just doesn't make sense to me at all. How do you hate history more than math? But they did, and he talked about that in his books. And that's, I think, something that we always need to keep in the back of our heads is kids don't hate history. They hate the way it's traditionally taught. And that's the part that I think we really need to fight against. This, by the way, is my favorite game on my phone. It's the name is very appropriate. I am addicted to Trivia Crack. But the reason I put this up here is I think a lot of times K-12 social studies teachers as a group, not individuals. And I, even watching some of your posts and your chat stuff, you guys are doing some really cool things. But as a whole, when I go into a lot of social studies classrooms, we teach social studies so that our kids are really good at Trivia Crack. And if you're not familiar with Trivia Crack, just stay away, stay far, far away. But it's a great game, but it doesn't prepare our kids to be good citizens. It very simply is, here's a question, you've got multiple choice answers, pick the best answer. And we train our kids to be really good Trivia Crack players, but we don't train our kids to be really good citizens. We don't train them to think historically and to solve problems and use evidence and make claims and use evidence to support those claims. We are training a generation of Trivia Crack professionals. And that's the part that I think we need to be really careful about. Here's some stuff, though, I think that we need to be aware of as well. When our students leave our schools, they revert back to the love of history that we all enjoy. These are some of the best-selling books in the last few years on Amazon.com. These are the things that people spend money on. All the Light We Cannot See, Wright Brothers, Boys in the Boat, Da Vinci Code, Killing Reagan. These are all books having to do with history and historical events. And we know this. Social studies is the story of people. And any book that we look at is a social studies book. In fact, for the elementary teachers in the room, there's a really good book that you need to get. And I'm already off task here a little bit. Sorry, Jane. But for elementary teachers, there's a really good book called Every Book is a Social Studies Book. So if Jane can go out and try to find that, that would be awesome. The link to that. Every book is a social studies book, because every trade book, every chapter book that we have elementary kids read can be crafted into a social studies lesson. And so once our kids leave, they're reading history. Once our kids leave, they're going to pay money to go to movies that have to do with history. My daughter, who's a sophomore in college, actually in Minnesota, is fired up because this weekend the last Hunger Games movie is coming out, and I don't know how she's going to rig it, but she's going to skip class or skip doing homework or something to go watch that particular movie. And you think, well, it's Hunger Games. That's not a social studies movie. But think about the themes in that movie of censorship and control and freedom and honor and courage and friendship and revolution and conflict. All of the things that we can talk about, for example, during the American Revolution, are embedded in that story. And so we've got kids who, when they're in school, say they hate history, but as soon as they graduate, revert back to that human nature of, I just want to understand how we think and what happens in relationships and other people and other cultures, and I want to know the story behind all of these things. That's just who we are. And so my task, and I think your task as well, is how do I tell the story? How do I find a way to connect with that sort of native love of the story of who we are, of history? And so that's, I guess that's my soapbox for the day, because it's something that we need to really focus on, finding ways to connect kids to the past and finding ways to connect that past with their current present. And it's obviously a trend. We've seen the National Accounts for the Social Studies Civic College Career and Civic Life Standards come out. In Kansas, we have a new set of standards that focus on process and historical thinking skills rather than Trivia Crack sort of multiple choice. Our assessment, by the way, it used to be 60 multiple choice questions on a very specific sorts of what we call delta indicators. And now the test, it's brand new. It's first time we're going to roll it out is this spring, and it is 2 primary source documents and a writing prompt. That's it, and a rubric. And students have to look at the evidence, use context and background knowledge and historical thinking skills to respond to a writing prompt. That's different than what we were doing before. And I think the pendulum is swinging back to this idea of having kids do history and help them start to make sense of the different sorts of evidence. So the focus truly is, I think, needs to start to think about how can we have kids read and write, and not just read and write, but read and write and communicate. This is it's really one of the quotes I use a lot when I work with social studies teachers. We all practice reading and writing, and I'm going to add communicating. The idea of communicating and writing is evidence of thinking. When we have kids write, it proves that they have a thought. It proves that they are making sense of evidence. And so, and we can have kids write in lots of ways. And so that's what we're going to, again, talk about in the next few minutes of what can that look like? What does it look like when we have kids do history and use primary sources and evidence to make claims and to create arguments and to communicate ideas? The basic sticky idea for us in the next 60 minutes or so is pretty simple. When we use primary sources, our kids have to read and write. And when our kids read and write, they have to think. And when our kids think, their brains are rewired. There's a lot of very cool brain research about how our brains learn and store information. But when we have kids read and write, their brains do different things than they were doing before. And here's the big idea. This is the sticky idea. Rewiring brains is a good thing. This is something that we need to be doing. And creating trivia crack professionals, as fun as that game is, it does not really rewire the brain. It doesn't prepare our kids to be successful citizens in a democracy. Doing history does, and that's what we need to focus on. So really quick, I don't want to belabor the point of reading and writing, but as we start to read, write, and think, these are some skills that we really need to focus on as social studies teachers. These are some very specific sort of reading skills that we focus on in Kansas that the national framework focuses on as well. And I'm assuming that all or most of you are doing these things already, but this is the sort of stuff that we need to think about as we plan lessons and units. When we have kids write, there are some very specific sorts of things that we need to have our kids do as well. And one of the things that I know, again, I'm sort of off topic here, but one of the things that I want you to start to think about, if you haven't already, is that we need to redefine what writing looks like. When we say the word writing, we think of paper and pencil. We might think about iPads and Chromebooks and laptops a little bit, but there's different sorts of writing. There's different sorts of proving that I'm thinking, and that includes some of the examples that we're going to show you today. And then the last little literacy piece is the idea of communicating, of sharing information with other people. Once you've created a product of some sort, what does it look like when we share it with other people? These are skills that in a lot of ways we as social studies teachers haven't focused on. So I know that this is a lot of sort of build up to the strategies, but I think it's really important that this is exactly the kinds of stuff that our kids should be doing. And again, in Kansas and lots of places, and I'm not saying Kansas has a monopoly on any of this. Where I work with a lot of teachers, our focus is moving away from foundational knowledge, specific pieces of data as the end in mind. The end in mind now is what should kids be doing with that foundational knowledge, with those specific pieces of data. And the reading, writing, and communicating literacy skills give us a structure that we can use to start to plan lessons and units that create citizens, not trivia crack professionals. I still hear from social studies teachers that I'm not a reading teacher, and I agree. You're not a reading teacher. You're a social studies teacher, but you can't do social studies unless your kids can read and write well. It's a non-negotiable skill, and I don't know if that's you just got to accept that. our kids need to read and write and communicate. If we're going to create good social studies students and citizens as what we do at our core, then our kids need to read and write. So that's my soapbox. Sorry for getting off on the task. Here's obviously the bigger question then. What does that look like? What can we do in our classrooms so that our kids can read, write, and communicate and do social studies and do history? And this is the framework that we use where I work. This is the framework that we use when I go to work with social studies teachers. And it's not rocket science at all, but it gives us a sense of, okay, if I'm going to do a lesson or a unit, I need to do these 4 things. My kids need to be doing these 4 things, and I need to plan for my kids to do these 4 things: collect, collaborate, create, and communicate. I need to have them collect and organize information to solve a problem that I give them. They need to work together with other people. They need to create a solution to that problem, and then they need to communicate that solution to other people. And so today what we're going to do is focus on 2 of those: collecting and organizing information, just give you some strategies of what that might look like, and then some create strategies as well, again with a focus on literacy skills as the sort of foundation for everything that we do. So here's the link that I promised you earlier. If you go to socialstudiescentral.com, off in another tab or another window, at the very top, click on Presentation Materials, and then if you scroll to the bottom, there's a link called Using Primary Sources, and that's where you need to go. And I'll give you a couple minutes to go to there because there's some images there that you're going to need to solve this first problem that I'm going to give you. All right, so Social Studies Central, looks like the link's already there in the chat feature. Click on Presentation Materials, and then scroll to the bottom of that bottom right-hand corner, Using Primary Sources. And the links that I want you to be, I'm going to have the images up here, but it's going to be easier if you have access to these images. It just says image 1, image 2, and image 3 on that page once you get to it. Joan, awesome. Thanks for keeping up on all these directions. So here's what I need you to do. Hopefully you're listening to this and viewing this with at least one other person. If you're all by yourself, just do some split personality or something. Find a buddy. I need you to work with somebody else to solve these problems or solve this very specific problem. So find a buddy. If it's a larger group that you're with, find 1 or 2 other people to solve a very specific problem. All right, so here's the problem. If you've already looked at you're already on the website, you know that you can open image 1, image 2, and image 3. This is image 1, and I'm going to click through all of these so that you get a sense of what they are, and then I'm going to give you the problem. So I've got image 1, image 2, and image 3. And here's what I want you to do with your buddy. And hopefully you made eye contact with one of the smartest people in the room, because you got to. Here's the problem, or the question I want you to start with. Why is there a difference between these 3 images? So talk amongst yourselves with your buddy, or talk to yourself if you're the only person in the room, and solve the problem of why do these images look different? And while you're solving that problem, think about the sorts of questions that you're actually asking yourself to solve the first problem. What sort of questions would a historian ask themselves to solve this particular problem? Think about that sort of outside the box as you try to solve the actual problem, because I'm going to ask you that as well. Pamela, on the site, if you're on socialstudiescentral.com, and then click on Presentation Materials, scroll clear to the bottom of that page, Presentation Materials, and there's a link called Using Primary Sources. That's going to open up a page. It's going to be 3 columns of a lot of stuff. We're only concerned about the first column on the left, and on the left-hand side there should be some bolded links, image 1, image 2, and image 3. Awesome. So as you're thinking about this, here's and again, we don't have a ton of time. This, by the way, is a huge 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 day unit. We're doing this in about 10, 15 minutes. So if you could, in the chat side, in the chat feature, type in the questions that you had to ask yourself to solve the problem. The bigger problem right now is, why is there a difference? What were some questions that you were asking yourself to solve that bigger problem? And Keith, that's a great question. That's one of the first questions we should be asking ourselves. Do these 3 images all are all the same place? So we'll start with that question. Keith, that's the question. Are all these 3 images from the same place? And write yes or no. And you're going to have to claim it, obviously, because you're putting in the chat feature with your name attached to it. Are all 3 images taken at the same place? Is it the same location, yes or no? So Kathleen, Pamela, Keith, they're brave enough to vote. Robert says no, brave enough to vote. Awesome. And it's a great question, and Keith asked the exact right sort of question. Is this the same place? Because that's going to make a difference about trying to solve the bigger problem. And I like Kim. She's going to waffle a little bit. It's too difficult to say with positivity. I like that. If you said yes or no, one of the things that I would ask my students, and I'm going to ask you, and you don't have to type it, you can if you want, but how do you know? If the answer is yes or the answer is no, prove it. You made a claim. You answered a problem. You have to have some evidence. So I started with a very simple question. Is it the same location? Now the question goes a little deeper. How do you know? Prove it. Prove that it's yes or prove that it's no. Provide some evidence. And here's one that says trees seem to match, so same place or area. Here's the answer, just to solve, just as we move forward a little bit, the answer is yes, these are all exactly the same place. And if you haven't figured out already, you probably already know this. These are Google Street View images. So looking at the trees and the vegetarian, the sidewalk, the driveway, this is all the same basic place, almost within about 10 or 15 feet. As the Google Street View car drove down this particular street, it was taking pictures. If you don't know, if you haven't used this particular feature in Google Maps, it's awesome for this sort of stuff. So you can go to Google Maps, what maps.google.com, type in an address, go to Street View, and in the top left-hand corner where I have that black thing, the black box overlaid over the top of it, there's a little slider that you can select different years of Street View views. All right. So it goes back as far as they have Street View, which is kind of cool. So here's the answer to the first question that Keith had about location. It is the same place. What's the next question that we want you to think about, or that you should have been thinking about? And I'm scrolling through the chat feature. There was something about particular order. I don't remember who typed that in there. Does the order of the images make a difference? I label them image 1, image 2, image 3. Is that if it's the same place, does chronology make a difference? The order in which they were taken make a difference to help solve the bigger question of why is there a difference? So one of the things that one of you, and again, I apologize for not remembering who that was, it does make a difference, obviously, in the order in which these pictures were taken. So be talking real quick, and I'm going to tell you the answer in just a couple minutes. Sorry, because we're going to continue to move on. But again, a longer sort of conversation that you can already start to imagine with your students if you did this in the classroom. The question here now is, which one was taken first, which one was taken second, and which one was taken third? And again, your answer may be different than somebody else's. Have some evidence to back up your answer. Are these in chronological order already? Or are they switched? Are they backwards? This is the sort of stuff we need to be doing with our kids. One of the things I say to teachers a lot is that your task is to create academic discomfort in the minds of your students. Your job is to create academic discomfort. They want you to tell them the answer. Your task is not to give them the answer, but to create really good questions for them to solve. And so this is the sort of practice that we can start to use to train our kids to think, to solve problems. So again, because of the time constraints and the things that we need to continue to talk about and move on and share, here's the answer. All right, just so you know, and you can look smug if you're right. I won't see you look smug, but you can look smug to your buddies. The answer is exactly as I presented them. Image 1 is the first one that was taken. Image 2 was taken second, and image 3 was taken third. So this is the first. This is the first image. It was taken in 2008. The second image was taken in 2011. And the third image was taken in 2013. Now we're still trying to solve the original problem. Why is there a difference? So now we know more information. We know it's the same place, and we know specific dates. Now, what you're probably doing right now in your own head is starting to activate prior knowledge. And your kids are going to try to do the same thing as well. You're trying to apply context. What was going on in 2008? What was going on in 2011, 2013? And oh yeah, Kathleen, I love that. You're exactly right. It's a very short amount of time when we start thinking about this, about 4 or 5 years. I went to this particular street view just last week. The couch is missing, so they have an updated street view, probably 2015. It looks almost exactly the same, other than the fact that the couch is gone. So here's the original question as we continue to talk about this, and you activate prior knowledge and context. You're going to probably have a better sense of being able to answer this problem than your kids are. I'm going to give you some more data in just a few minutes, but does anybody have an educated guess that they're willing to share in the chat feature? Obviously, there is obviously a right answer, but at this point you may not have enough data to make a great guess, but you want to guess anyway. Anybody brave? Oh yeah, multiple attendees are typing. I like that. Yeah. Lost jobs, people left. Angela, educated guess? They abandoned the neighborhoods at Cheryl. Yep. Obviously they're gone. This leads into some other questions then, right? Why would you abandon a neighborhood? What jobs were lost? Where exactly is this? Even more specific kinds of questions. If we know this is the same place, what place are we talking about? Not a relative location, a specific location. And Pamela's already using background knowledge to solve the problem. Joan's jumping in, awesome. New Orleans, Katrina, that's a good guess as well. Here's some more data that I would give my kids, because they would probably need this data. So with this new data, you can sort of now, am I right or am I wrong, and adjust your answer. Here's one of the tools I think we need to start to use, and I'll give you some research, or I'll give you the link to this, or Jane will in a couple minutes. This is something called Google Public Data. Google Public Data has, I don't even know how many databases it has, but basically what it does is give you a chance to search databases and then easily create charts and graphs. So when you said Detroit 2008, Pamela, you're exactly right. Joan, factory jobs in Detroit. This is a chart that we were able to create with some Chicago teachers about a year or so ago as they were studying, it was a government class, and they were studying governmental policies. And they were studying how federal policies affect local areas. And we went to a public data, Google public data, and did population. We did a search for population. We found some census data, and we literally just clicked some buttons, and in about 5 minutes made this chart. So we were curious about Detroit. They were actually from a small suburb of Chicago called Summit Village, Illinois, and I put these other ones in just because I'm from Kansas City, or from Kansas. And you can start to have kids to look at this piece of data as well. I can look at 2008 and population, about 900,000 in Detroit. I look at 2011, 2012, 2013, and I lost almost 200,000 people in about 3 or 4 years. So this is some data. Again, we're asking kids to solve the problem. Why is there a difference? Here's another chart from that same public data source. This is a chart that measures unemployment in the same place at the same time. And obviously they're starting to see a huge spike in unemployment in 2008. So your context that you already had, your prior knowledge that as adults you already had, and a social studies teacher you already had, you can start to solve the problem. Lots of unemployment, economic downturn, the Great Recession, we don't have jobs. I have to leave. And if I have to leave, I can't afford to pay off my house. I just literally abandoned my house. And there are places in Detroit right now, and it's starting to rebound a little bit, but there are places in Detroit that look exactly like those images where houses were torn down by the city, by the federal government, or set on fire by arsonists. It's an amazing statistic about how quickly arson escalated over those 4 years in the Detroit area because nobody was living in these houses. And in some ways, maybe the city didn't really mind because it gave them a chance to tear things down and push things out. There are literally neighborhoods that don't have houses on them anymore, and trees are overgrown in the area, and so we have deer and coyotes and foxes moving back into what used to be neighborhoods and now are nature preserves because of this economic issue. So Google public data is a tool that you can use, and I'm hoping Joan put it up there, gives you the ability to search databases, not just in North America, but around the world, to get numbers, evidence, foundational knowledge that we can share with our kids, or that they can go out and find to solve problems that we need to find them. So yeah, Pamela, you're right. It's just incredible. They couldn't sell their house and pay off their loans, so a lot of times they just left them. They just ditched them and said, "Okay, the bank, it's yours. We're just leaving." So this is the next step that this particular set of teachers begin to use was something that they called the pie chart activity. Why is there a difference in these three images? That was the original sort of hook activity. We now know why there was a difference. The houses were being abandoned and then later tore down. But we wanted kids to start to create some products. And so one of the things that they asked their kids to do is, why did the Great Recession happen? If this is what it looked like in Detroit, why did it happen? What was the cause? And it's a much longer sort of lesson. Again, we're doing this in about 10 or 15 minutes, but they asked their students to literally, as their end assessment, their unit test was to very simply write an essay asking them, or trying to solve the problem of why did the Great Recession happen. And it all revolved around the kids making a pie chart. And you can pick as many different, as the teacher, they actually gave them, with the research they did throughout the unit, they came up with these lists of different reasons. And the writing prompt for the assessment was, what was the cause of the Great Recession? Rank the reasons in order and make a pie chart. Now, this is just a pie chart I just put together. You can argue with my pie chart, which is obviously the whole point of social studies, but the kids had to make a pie chart, and you have 4, 5, or 6 choices that we did some research on that were possible causes, but now you have to rank them from most important to least important causes. And you have to make a pie chart of 3 of those. And the only rule they said the kids, the only rule you cannot do is that you can't have 33, 33, 33%. They got to be different. You got to have one that's more important than the other. But you should start to already think about, well, wait a second, if I have a pie chart, I could just make the pie chart. You're already thinking, yeah, Now you have to justify it, make an argument, state a claim, and use evidence that not enough regulatory oversight was the main cause. There were some other causes. This was the most important one, and this is why. Now, these are high school kids, right? But you can start to use this pie chart activity in a lot of other ways as well. Causes of the American Civil War, causes of World War I, causes of the Great Depression. You can go back in history in lots of different ways to start to do this and use this particular chart. Everything up to this point that we've talked about and everything that the teachers did and the kids did in this much larger unit was to get them to this particular point, make a claim, and support their claim with evidence. Now, when I showed this to a couple of teachers earlier this semester, these were 8th grade American history teachers, and they said, we can do the same thing. And I said, really? You don't teach any of this stuff? And he says, yeah, we do. They teach, why did people move from the East to the West in the 1840s and 50s? So think about that for just a second. One of the things we want our kids to do is to connect past and present. The question they wanted their 8th grade students to solve is, why would somebody leave the eastern United States and risk death on the Oregon Trail? Because a lot of people didn't make it. What made it so important for you to get to Oregon that you would leave the East and go west along this trail where you knew the risk of death was pretty high? And you take your family with you. And that was the question they wanted their kids to wrestle with. And so they literally started with this same Detroit sort of scenario. Why would somebody leave Detroit? Well, they don't have jobs. Why would somebody leave the East? Don't have a job. Huge economic depression in the 1840s and 50s. And so people were leaving the East to go on the Oregon Trail for some of the same reasons people were leaving Detroit to go other places in the United States, to find work, to make a living, to survive. And it was a great sort of hook. And so their pie chart at the end was, why would people leave the East and move west? What was the causes? What were the push-pull factors? And be able to support your argument with evidence. And obviously, Kim, yeah, there's gold in California, and the lure of that was way better than what they had. So this is an example of how we can start to use Google Street View images, Google public data, and some literacy skills, some literacy activities that I think are really powerful to help kids start to think like historians, to do social studies, and to solve problems. So that's one example. I'm going to throw this real quick. I don't have a lot of time to talk about this particular tool. It's called Google Cardboard. If you've used Google Cardboard before, post in the chat feature, because if you haven't, you need to go out and play with this particular tool. It's called Google Cardboard. It literally is made out of cardboard, and there's lots of these different things. There's a video too on that, using primary sources. I hope I put that on there. Oh, I didn't put it on there. Yeah, I did. Google Cardboard video is on that Using Primary Sources website. And so you can go and watch that video now or later. But basically the idea is that this is 3D virtual reality 360-degree images and video. So if I'm going to have my kids solve this problem, if I think back to the 3 images in Detroit, I can get a Google Street View app, put it on my phone, put the phone in that piece of cardboard with the lenses, and I'm walking literally down the street in Detroit, looking around at all of the places that aren't there now. There are no houses. I'm in the middle of the street, just like the Google Street View car is, and I can get in that place. I was at a conference, and I showed this to a teacher. And I put him on a mountain where somebody was mountain climbing, and he looked down, he was 1,000 feet up, and he looked back, and he started to tip over, and he said something he shouldn't have said in front of students. He literally fell on his butt with this set of cardboard stuck to his head because it is so realistic. Think of places that you talk about. The events and the places are connected, and if I can put a kid in a place 360 degrees, virtual reality, 3D, why would I not do that? This particular version that you're looking on the screen is like, I think, $4.99. You can have kids make them themselves. Again, on that using primary sources, I put some links where you can go out and find cardboard and purchase them sort of already pre-made. You have to usually fold them together, or you can even, maybe better yet, download the plans, go to Pizza Hut and say, I need 100 pizza boxes. I need $250 to pay for the lenses and the magnets and the washer and the rubber bands. And we'll make sure that when we fold the cardboards, we're going to have Pizza Hut on the outside of the box. And as our kids are playing with these, we're going to take pictures and video with Pizza Hut on the front of the box and make sure these get on our website. That's what we're going to do. And you take one of these, you get one of these and take them down there first. And then what Pizza Hut or what pizza place or what takeout place or what restaurant is not going to say, yes, I want to be a part of this. This is too awesome. So you can buy them yourself. But I think to have kids build them, you can do that as well. Your head right now should be going, well, I teach world history. Can I go to the pyramids? Yes. Google Street View has walked around the Sphinx and the pyramids. I can get 360-degree 3D virtual reality at the Sphinx. We haven't been in a place yet where there isn't some sort of Google Street View or what is called a photosphere, a 360-degree photo bubble of a place. Some guy said, well, I bet they haven't been to Machu Picchu. And I said, you'd be wrong because we've already been there. Any place that you can think of, I'm pretty sure there's going to be a picture or an image or a video that works. Now they work really well on Android phones, by the way. Better than iPhones right now because obviously Google is an Android thing. Right now, Android phones, literally, you can watch 360-degree videos. I was in a jet, flying a jet a couple days ago. I was in a World War II 1941 battle, 360 degrees with sound and smoke and tanks coming over the top and vibrations. So if we're going to use Street View, this is sort of the next version of Street View. 360 degrees. So you got to try it out. And I know I talked about it too much maybe, but it's another tool that we should be using with our kids. So the video is on there. You can get a view of what that looks like. And we're going to move on a little bit if that's okay, but definitely try that out and see if it's going to work in your classroom. Google Cardboard. Okay, we're going to keep going. One of the things that Keith talked about was having kids analyze primary sources in a visual format, and so if we keep with that sort of theme of moving west in the 1840s, 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, this is an image that they also used with their kids, these 8th grade teachers, and they wanted their kids to start to analyze evidence from that particular period. And obviously this comes from the Library of Congress. This is the question they asked their kids. And they made a very simple statement that you had to agree to or disagree with. This is an example of propaganda, true or false. And so obviously there are lots of ways that you can have kids analyze these images, and Keith did a great job. Obviously the Library of Congress has some really good primary source analysis worksheets that are perfect. I mean, the whole idea of the observe, reflect, and question makes a lot of sense. Those questions are great questions to have kids mess with. One of the things that I've noticed, and maybe you've noticed as well, is that when I give a kid this huge piece of data, right? There's just too much stuff going on in this photograph. There's a problem when we have kids look at all this, and sometimes I think they get overwhelmed, especially younger kids. So elementary, middle school kids sometimes, here, analyze this image. It's like freaks them out. They just don't know what to do because there's too much to look at and too much to do. And so I think we can scaffold for kids what this can look like when we have them answer this question. I need you to look for specific sorts of things. So there's a strategy called Crop It, and I don't know if you've heard about it, but if you haven't, this is a tool or strategy that you need to try with your kids. This is basically what it looks like. You give kids 2 L-shaped pieces of paper, that's it. And then you ask them questions, and they use these L-shaped pieces of paper to highlight parts of the image so that it's very specific about what they're looking at. And we're going to try this. You don't have the L-shaped pieces of paper, but you've got 2 hands, hopefully, and you got a forefinger and a thumb, make two L shapes with your thumb and your forefinger, and you've got a crop it tool, and that's not the best crop it tool because, it just doesn't work so well. But do the best you can. Here's what I want you to do. I'm going to ask you some questions. You can download this image as well. You can open it up on from the Using Primary Sources. Jane or Joan will probably pop that link in the side box as well. You can download this across the continent image. And I'm going to ask you some questions. I'm going to put the questions up on the screen here in just a second. But I want you to practice cropping. And even if you just make like an OK signal with your forefinger and your thumb and just make a circle, that works too. The idea is that we want kids to very specifically look for things. We need to scaffold for them how to find information. And so here's some questions that I want you to think about. And we're not going to do all of these, but just to give you a sense of what this would look like with kids. Crop to show what first caught your attention, what first caught your eye. So using your two L-shaped finger cropping tools or your OK circle tool that you have on your left or right hand, highlight just the one thing on that image that first caught your eye. And then tell somebody beside you, why did you notice that part first? We're starting small here, right? We're just ramping our way up to having kids look for specific sorts of things. And you can start to see, you can see on my screen, if you're flipping back and forth between the actual image on your screen on one tab or window and back to the screen that we're presenting from, there's a whole set of different kinds of questions that you can ask your students. Now, this comes from a group called teachinghistory.org. And if you're familiar with Sam Weinberg, this is one of the Stanford History Education Group's websites. This is one of the ones that came out, 8 or 9 or 10 years ago. It still has some really great resources and ideas on it. The idea here is that Sam Weinberg is sort of the guru of doing history, of solving problems. And so these are questions that particular group created about, 8 or 9 years ago. But you can see some of the kinds of questions that we want our kids to think about. And I'm not sure if they ramp up as well as the observe, reflect question sort of scaffolding that the Library of Congress does, but these are still good questions that we need to train our kids to ask and to think about. Think of the writing prompts that you could create from these 4 sets of questions, and I think that becomes really, really powerful. So using the crop feature, the crop activity to help kids, especially younger kids, focus on specific sorts of pieces in a video, in an image, but you can also do the same thing with text. Think of the kinds of questions we want to have our kids ask about text, and we can do the same sort of thing with these crop tools. Now, here's some suggestions. As I work with teachers, they always have really good ideas of how to make these things better. And this is one of those things. And we're going to kind of keep talking about the crop it tools, but we're also going to talk about what one teacher called the sourcing overlay. This is a sourcing overlay. It's a really large piece of paper. They put some questions around the outside, and I'll talk about the questions in just a second, but then they've laminated it. Each kid has this. And because the questions are around the outside of this overlay, I can put an image. In this case, there's a political cartoon. I can put an image, a political cartoon, a piece of text, and I can slide that underneath this overlay, and then have, obviously, you can see in the image, kids can then highlight things with dry erase markers. Here's the question I'm answering, and here's where the answer in the text or the image or the political cartoon is. And so we scaffold for kids the questions that we need them to get good at asking. We train them to ask the right sorts of questions by literally putting it on the tools that we provide for them, right? And then I know a lot of elementary teachers already have used these. They're like little plastic sleeves that you can slide stuff into and then write on the top of it. So you might have already seen those, and that's where we got this idea. Well, why can't we do that with social studies evidence? You're using it to close read text. We're going to use it to analyze evidence, social studies evidence. So this works really well. Here are the questions that we put around the outside. These are the questions from the Stanford History Education Group's historical thinking chart. The 4 skills that Sam Weinberg says we need to train our kids to be good at: sourcing, contextualizing, corroborating, and close reading. What sorts of questions should we train our kids to ask? Because if you know Sam Weinberg's book, one of his first books was Historical Thinking and Other Unnatural Acts. Thinking historically is a skill we need to train our kids to do. And so when we have kids ask these sorts of questions and get good at asking these sorts of questions, then they start to think historically, that it's no longer just collecting data to solve a problem, to answer a trivia crack question, but to actually solve much larger problems of why would you move from Detroit? Why would you move from the East and get on the Oregon Trail and go to California? Those are the big problems we want our kids to focus on, and these sorts of questions and these questioning skills helps our kids do that. So flashback to that cropping tool, right? We have this sourcing overlay that has the questions around the outside. Think about that cropping tool, creating L-shaped pieces of paper, taking hard cardstock and having kids either write the questions on the cardstock or print them out on the cardstock before you cut them out and give them to kids. So that now I have a cropping tool with basically 4 sides, 2 tools, 2 sides each, 4 sets of questions. You're doing the math in your head, right? I've got sourcing, contextualizing, corroboration, and close reading questions. I put a series of questions on each side of those 2 cropping tools. I laminate them, and now I have kids in their binders, in a box on my desk, wherever they stick them in some of their backpacks or something. And every time they come to class, they need their crop tools, because the foundational sorts of questions that I want them to ask are on the tools they use themselves. So if I ask a question, I need you to figure out, if I go back to this example that Keith used earlier of the first Thanksgiving, he was asking you to think about, well, who created it? When do you think it was created? How do you know? Who was it written for? Who was the audience? Those questions are literally on the little prop tools that the kids are using to solve the problems. So again, a strategy that I think is really effective because it provides a tool and the questions for our kids to start to think like historians, and we're training them. Maybe by the time they're in high school, they don't need these tools, but if you're teaching elementary and middle school, you know this is a skill that we need to continue to develop, and I think these are some tools that we can use to help kids do that. All right? So we're going to move on. I've been talking for a while, so now I need you to do some stuff for me with your buddies. So again, make eye contact with your buddies, with the smart person in your group, because here we go. I need you to solve another problem. This supports a little bit about very much like what Keith was talking about before, the observe, reflect, and question. I call this the 3-stage media analysis, and we're still looking at images, but the 3-stage media analysis can also be used to look at text. And think back to the observe, reflect, and question stuff that Keith was having you think about and talk about earlier. And sort of overlay a new set of vocabulary that might help you and your kids as well. I talk about data, information, and knowledge. Data, information, and knowledge. The process is very similar to the process that Keith walked you through. Have kids collect data. Have them organize that data into patterns that make sense, information, and then have them address a problem that uses those patterns to have them make sense of what the patterns mean. So they're creating knowledge, data, information, and knowledge. The idea of having kids collect data, organize it into patterns that make sense, and then figure out what those patterns are telling us. So here's an exercise, an example of an exercise that some teachers did last spring that I thought worked really, really well. So with your buddies, I'm going to show you 3 images. Your task is very simple. Make a list of what you see. So in the chat feature on the right-hand side, just like you did earlier with the observe part that you were doing with Keith, just type in what you see. Don't try to infer anything. Again, he was spot on. Don't try to infer anything or figure anything out. Just make a list of what you see. All right? So here's what you see. Make a list. And so I'm going to do the obvious one. I see a horse. So type in things that you see in this particular image. All we're doing is collecting data. Wagon wheel, perfect. Yeah, that face mask, it looks like a clown mask. We've blown that up. It's actually just the weird shadows on his face. Um, I see that every time. It's like he's wearing a little hockey mask or something, but he's not. Perfect. Yeah, when the idea of the copyrighted 1908 is a huge clue. Perfect. You're looking for text as well as images. Yep. Perfect. I usually have, when I show this, I have people ask what the little strings hanging down from the horses are. There's extra credit if anybody knows what those strings are, because I didn't know. I had to go and ask a museum curator. Yes, Joan. Extra credit for Joan. Those keep the flies off. They just jiggle. They walk and they keep jiggling, and the flies won't land on the horses. I've never seen that before. All right, so we're collecting data. That's all we're doing, right? So here's the next part of the picture. I'm going to take part of the image off. Same idea. You're just collecting data. What do you see now? What are some? Don't try to infer anything. Just write down what you see. I like Josh. You're very, yes. Cabbages? Question mark? I'm not sure. I had somebody tell me they grow cabbage this big in Alaska. I'm a little I'm a little skeptical. All right. So yes, we're collecting data. All right. So hang on this. I'm going to show you two more images. Same idea. Write down what you see, and we're going to go through this pretty quickly because there's some other things I want to talk about. We got about 20 minutes left, so we're going to go really fast. All right. Now that you got the idea of how this works, we're going to go much quicker. Write down what you see very quickly. And again, you got about 20-30 seconds to do this. And if it's not very big, I apologize. Early mean, nice. That I never thought of that. This truly is an early mean. Here you go. Here's the additional information that I want you to write down. All right. So second image, I'm having kids collect data. Obviously, I'm covering up parts of the image because I don't want kids to see that part, right? I want them to see the giant cabbages and the giant rabbit after they see everything else. All right. So here you go. Last image. Same thing. All we're doing right now is collecting data. We're not inferring anything. We're not solving the problem. All you're doing is making a list. Now, if you're doing this with kids, you're making a list individually, share pair kinds of things, whole group, small group. What do you see? Here's my list. Compare and have kids look at each other's lists. This actually, by the way, I don't know if this happened in South Dakota, but this is a Kansas history. This is a state history class that this happened in Kansas. Kansas history is taught in 7th grade. So. I don't know if that gives you context right now. That might give you some clues. But again, all we're doing is collecting data. Hang on. Here's the last little bit of this image. Kim, you're right. They're herding rabbits. What do you think? Again, I don't want you to infer anything. I already know you are because that's how the brain works. So Jeanette's already sort of starting to figure this out. In western Kansas during the 1930s, huge numbers of rabbits, not a lot of food, and so they were eating all the crops. And so they had what were called Western Kansas rabbit drives. So in this exercise, we're having kids look at evidence in that 3-stage media analysis, collect data, organize the data into patterns that make sense to the kids, and then have them solve the problem. So here's the pattern creation. Here's the second stage of the analysis. Organize your lists and the information from your list into patterns that make sense. And all I want you to do, and we don't have time, right? But this is what I would have kids do. Create a very simple Venn diagram. How these 3 images different and how the images the same. How are they different and how they're the same in terms of the images? What's the content that was the same and different depending on the image that you looked at? So that's the process. That's the second stage. It's this third stage that really is the reading, writing, communicating, evidence of thinking part. Because here's the question. And one of you had already sort of mentioned this. I'm skeptical, I think one of you said. Which of these images is most historically accurate, and how do you know? That's the writing prompt. That's the assessment I want kids to mess with. Because we're talking about the 1930s, we're talking about the Great Depression, we're talking about the Dust Bowl. I want you to start to practice your historical thinking skills. We're going to start to evaluate evidence. We can't really solve other problems unless you get really good at solving, the problem of what evidence is valid to use. Some more background about the rabbits. Some rabbit drives actually collected the rabbits live and shipped them back east, and they were, chopped up for animal feed. Other times they would eat some of the rabbits, but a lot of times it would just be they would kill the rabbits and make big piles and set them on fire. They didn't know what else to do with them. There were thousands and thousands of these. Some very disgusting background, but trust me, if you taught middle school, that sucks kids in too. But this is an example of a three-stage media analysis, having kids collect data, organize the data into patterns, and then have kids make sense of the patterns. What do the patterns tell us? Data, information, knowledge. Keith used the terms observe, reflect, and question, and they both are really good ways to have kids start to make sense of a particular event or a particular problem. All right. There's, and again, I know we're going to go quick here as we start to wrap this up. We want kids to use, as they prove it, what are called evidence-based terms. I put a link to this on our website, and Jane or Joan might just put the link as well in the chat feature. Evidence-based terms of training kids to use the right sort of phrasing to make a claim. And I don't think we train our kids to do that well enough either. So these are some examples of evidence-based terms. And again, the link is is on the website if you want to look more. We're going to just jump. We're going to keep moving on to this last little bit of creating a solution. Collect, collaborate, create, and communicate. These are some examples of creating a solution, writing strategies, communication literacy strategies that we can use with our kids. So I love the fact that this is awesome. Keith used this image earlier. In his presentation, it was not planned, but it was meant to be. So Keith, kudos to you. Perfect little segue. I ran it across this little Lincoln selfie a couple years ago, and I was having some lunch with some social studies teachers, and being guys, we immediately started going a little bit morbid on if he's using his phone, what was he texting on the way to Ford's Theater? That sort of conversation. And we started thinking, well, wait a second. That's a great question. Why can't we have he was a forward thinker. Yes, he was very forward. We said, well, why can't we do this? Let's have conversation about what was on Abraham Lincoln's phone. So this is my phone. This is a graphic organizer of my phone, of the things, the apps and the texts and the contacts and emails that are on my phone. What would be on Abraham Lincoln's phone? What apps would be in his dock? What recent texts would he have sent? Who are his contacts? Who would he accept? Who would he block? Who would he be emailing? These are the sorts of questions that I think we can ask our kids. I don't need to use a phone to have technology integrated in my classroom. Kids already understand this. This is just another sort of writing exercise, a writing prompt that I can have my kids. And then at the end, prove it. Why do you think his contact list look like this? So a certain sort of writing exercise that we can have kids create. Here's some other things. And again, we're going to go quick because I want to answer some questions. So I know I got about 10 minutes left. So there's some other tools that help kids create a response to a writing prompt. This is something I stole from a high school teacher last year. He was using something he called tic-tac-tell. I don't know if you've seen that or used this before. Again, I think I put the actual assignment on the website that we shared with you earlier. Tic-tac-toe, you put vocabulary words, events, people, ideas in a tic-tac-toe matrix. The writing prompt very simply is you got to pick 3 in a row and connect them somehow in a 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 or 7 or 8 sentence essay. It's up to you to pick, right? But they have to trade items, buffalo, sedentary. How do those 3 things connect? How do houses, buffalo, and horses connect? So we're having kids mess with vocabulary, but we're also having them mess with vocabulary in context and then writing a response based on how they see that connection happening. Now, one of the things he said he did, he started with this sort of tic-tac-toe method early on, and they got good at it. And I love this because later on, I don't know if you could do this with middle school, elementary, because it would take a huge amount of, I guess, prep work. But he started putting either images or primary source documents in these boxes. I think that is so cool. How do these three primary sources connect? He was putting past and present events in the boxes and having kids connect past and present events and primary sources and evidence together. I just think this is a really good way to help kids learn vocabulary in context, as well as providing a great writing prompt strategy, especially for high school kids. So that's one example that kids can use. Here's a couple other things, examples of writing prompts that we can start to use with our kids. And again, we're going to go through these really quickly. Just different sorts of more creative sort of writing prompts than, why are these images all the same? Wah, wah, wah. This one, way more fun for kids to mess with. What would be in the camera? I love this question. It's not mine, by the way, but I still love it. Here's another one. More, I guess, modern U.S. history. Yeah, you're right. When there are Facebook pages as well, not just texts and tweets. Yeah, private box thieves. Nice. Okay, so here's a prompt. I got distracted. Sorry, Wayne, you distracted me with that great little post. The last thing I want to share with you real quick is something called history.co. Obviously, it's a sort of play on words of history. This is an interactive timeline. You can create free accounts at history.co. It's another powerful way to have kids create timelines, and not just timelines, but interactive timelines with all sorts of ways to make the entries on the timeline very, very interactive. Polls and video clips and audio clips and question and answer and lots of really cool ways. Because it's free, I just really like this, to have kids create a product that solves a problem. If we go back to the problem of why would you move west in the 1850s, prove it, answer the question by creating a timeline that's very interactive with interactive elements. So I know we don't have time to talk much more about this, but I just wanted to throw that out. See skills with historical content. So it's a very cool tool and it's free. You need to go check that out. All right. Last thing before we leave. If only there were some other tools. Well, obviously, guess what? There are lots of other tools. If you've been on that Using Primary Sources website, there are a ton of resources and tools on that page. You're going to find some of these as well. This is something called the C4framework.com. We create these cards. Each card, a C4 framework card, a C4 card, has a strategy or an idea on one side and alignments to the Common Core and College and Career Civic Life Standards on the other. And so you can get examples of these available out there at C4framework.com. And I'll shut up, and I got about, I think Jane or Joan, I think I have about 5 minutes left for questions. So I'll just shut up and let Jane and Joan ask questions or let you guys type questions.
That was fantastic, fast and furious with lots of great stuff. Questions, go ahead and type them in the box and we'll get them answered for you.
Wynn, you're welcome. And thanks for distracting me by that little box seats baby quote. That's awesome. I'm going to steal that.
Also remember, all of the links that Glenn is talking about and that we've been trying to keep up with in chat will be posted with the archive. So you'll have them forever.
Political cartoons. Thanks, Joan, for posting that one on there.
So much to explore, so little time.
That's true. Kim, yeah, most of the stuff, well, I'm trying to think of the different things that are on there. All the images are from the Library of Congress, and I didn't check the. I just learned from Keith how I can check copyright. I knew it was on there. I didn't know where it was. I'm pretty sure all of those, Kim, are Library of Congress open source, legal to use.
And you can always just put a link.
Okay.
That's always allowed.
Yeah. Yep. Definitely, obviously, you have my Twitter feed. You can direct message me if you come up with a question or need to ask something later on. You have my email address there as well. You can definitely get a hold of me that way. I have the glennwiebe.org is my blog. I try to post things on 3 or 4 times a week. There's a tip of the week link on there so that every Friday, or usually, hopefully Friday, sometimes Monday, there's a link or a post that goes out. You get it automatically in your email box. So definitely check that out. Feel free to read that, make comments, but a lot of the stuff I do in my presentations, I put on my blog before I do the presentation or after sometimes as well, but lots of resources there from lots of teachers that I get a chance to work with. So make sure you go to glennwiebe.org and check out the blog.
Okay. Glenn, Angela asked if she can put your link on her library website.
Yeah, definitely. You bet. Yeah. And if you could, I guess I'd get greedy if you could put both of those links, the glennwiebe.org link, which actually goes to a website called History Tech, which is the blog, and then the socialstudiescentral.com page. That would be great. Both of those. I mean, they link between the two of them, but one's really, yeah, they are complementary. Sorry, I was babbling there.
We've got a few more minutes if anybody has questions or comments.
Did you guys get a chance to go look at that Google Cardboard video? Questions about the cardboard?
I think that's one that people are really going to be diving into when we're done with our presentations here.
We went out and purchased, we have a box of about 10 of those, and we're 3D printing them now. We're trying to figure out if you can use a 3D printer to make them. We found a 3D file, a couple 3D files, and so we're testing those out. And I don't know if you have 3D printers in your building, but this would be a perfect sort of connection to the STEAM movement in your building. Connect with the makerspace idea. It's one way to get some funding, because you go, oh, we should get these because it's sort of like a science math thing, isn't it? And then you get to use them for your social studies stuff. So that's another sort of, I'm all about trying to finagle money out of somebody else's pocket. So that's one way to do it.
Okay, we've got 2 minutes left. Let's make good use of it.
It's going to be a very quiet, James, going to be a very quiet 2 minutes, but I can babble on about stuff forever, but
I think we're kind of overwhelmed and trying to take in what we've heard so far.
I would really encourage you, especially middle school and high school teachers, to explore the Google Public Data website. One of the pieces of evidence that I, as a classroom teacher, I never used well at all is that sort of database kind of stuff, population and census and crime rate and temperature and all of those things that seem kind of wonky and mathematical sort of thing. The Google database is one of your best friends for using different sorts of evidence than what we traditionally have done. I mean, we're really big on using diaries and speeches and images, but the database is another tool that we need to use to help kids start to make sense of and create context around specific events. So that's one I would really encourage you to go out and play with.
It looks like it might be easier to use than, say, some of the U.S. Census or that type of material.
Yeah, it really is. I mean, obviously, one of the databases that they have is the U.S. Census data, but it gives you a way to manipulate that data very quickly and easily. Seriously, the population. I just clicked Michigan, then I clicked on Detroit, and I clicked on 3 other cities, and it automatically populates that data in the chart. And I can pick the kind of chart and graph that it creates for me. So
Ah, good. Okay. We'll be trying that out. And your time is up.
awesome.
Thanks so much for being with us. We got so much wonderful information. Let's all say goodbye to Glenn and thank you so much. And we will be taking a 5-minute break to get